when a girl was treated like a piece of merchandise. Something inside her had died long before her innocence was taken away. Hello. My dear friends, I'm Elizabeth. With 68 years of life experience and stories etched into my soul for over 5 decades. I sat there on the porch in Fresno, California. I was enjoying my coffee and butter cookies while the cicadas sang in the oak tree out back. Today, I decided to open up to all of you because some truths need to be spoken. Those truths needed to be shared, even if they hurt the soul of the teller and the listener. Before I start this difficult journey, I want to ask anyone watching this video to like it and subscribe to the channel. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel. It would mean so much to know I'm not the only one sharing this story. And if you could comment below to let me know which city you're watching from, your kindness would give me the strength to keep going. I really wanted to read about that in the comments of this video. Let me take you back to 1955, when I wasn't even born yet. My mother, Margaret, was just 18 years old. And she was in love with a young man named James, who worked in construction in Modesto. They planned to get married when they found out I was on the way. My father was so excited when my mother told him the news. He started working overtime, saving every penny to prepare our little home in the suburbs, at one of those construction sites, while he was working on the 3rd floor of a building under construction. The Vengerville, too. The scaffolding collapsed and he fell. They said it was a head injury. He didn't even make it to the hospital alive. My mother was 5 months pregnant when she got the news. I never knew my father's face, but to this day, I still carry the only photo of him that my mother kept in a small wooden box. He was a slim young man with a shy smile and kind eyes. His death changed everything. My mother, with no education and pregnant, couldn't find a job. My father's family came from rural Tennessee and they barely had enough to support themselves, so they couldn't help. That's when my grandfather, Walter, offered us a place to stay. At the time, it seemed like a blessing. But now I know it was the beginning of a nightmare that lasted for years. I was born in January 1956 at home with a midwife. A beautiful girl with eyes like my father's. My mother said life was tough. But in those early years, things still seemed normal. We lived in a small room behind my grandfather's house that he had fixed up. My mother took in laundry and cleaning jobs around town and sold candy at the school gate. It barely provided enough food for us, but we managed. My grandfather, Walter, had served in the military when he was young. He was a strict, quiet man with strong principles. Widowed for many years, he managed his small pension tightly. He wasn't affectionate, but he wasn't cruel in my early years. He was just distant. As if I was a necessary inconvenience, he tolerated for the sake of his daughter. Everything started to change when I turned 7. I remember him watching me more closely as I played in the yard. This girl is growing up more beautiful than we expected. He used to comment to my mother. At the time, I didn't understand what that meant. Now, with the wisdom of many years, I know he was calculating my market value. I went to school like other children, but I was always quiet and observant. My teacher said I was smart but too shy. The truth was, something about men made me instinctively afraid. Maybe it was the way my grandfather looked at me. Or perhaps it was the absence of my father, a man I only knew through stories. Our financial situation kept getting worse. My mother aged before her time, her hands cracked from detergent and her back bent from scrubbing floors. There were nights I heard her crying softly in our small room. I pretended to sleep, but kept her sobs in my heart. At 10 years old, I started helping my mother with the housework. I washed smaller clothes, swept the yard, and sold her cookies to the neighbors. Around that time, I noticed my grandfather watching teenage girls walking by on the street. His gaze made me shudder, even though I didn't know why. "Elizabeth," he said to me when he caught me looking at him, "you have to pick them at the right time. Not too green and not too ripe." I was confused by that strange comparison, but I kept it to myself like so many other things. My mother worked more and more and was home less and less. She stayed near her father, as if something about him scared her too. Many years later, I realized she probably sensed what was coming, but was too busy to stop it. Many years later, I understood that she probably sensed what was about to happen, but was too overwhelmed to do anything. When I was 12, we faced a serious problem. Nearly 2 months with no income. Debts piling up. My grandfather's pension barely covered the medical bills. That's when I saw him talking to a strange man at our gate. A stout man around 40, dressed neatly, with a big car parked out front. They looked at me several times during their conversation, and the man smiled in a way that made me run inside. Who was that man? "Grandpa?" I asked after the stranger left. "A friend who might solve our problems. Elizabeth. He wants to get to know you more." Those words echoed in my mind for days. I was still too innocent to fully understand. But deep down, something in me was ringing alarm bells. We were facing eviction, and the pharmacist wouldn't extend credit anymore. One night in May, a few months before my 13th birthday, I overheard a conversation that changed my life forever. "The girl is still too young. Dad," my mother's voice sounded pained, "she's almost a woman now. And Dr. Lawrence paid a lot of money. We need the money. Margaret. Or have you forgotten about the bills? But she's just a child." "My daughter. And what's the point of being your daughter if we're both out on the street? Dr. Lawrence won't harm her. He just wants her to carry the child his wife can't have. She's strong, healthy, and beautiful. It's just a service like any other." I felt the blood in my veins turn cold. Even though I didn't fully understand what they were planning, I knew something terrible was being decided about me without my knowledge or consent. "And after the child is born?" my mother asked, her voice weaker as if giving in. "They'll take the baby. We'll keep the money, and life goes on. If it works, there will be other couples interested. We can fix our situation once and for all." I'll never forget the heavy silence that followed. A long, weighty silence that seemed to hold the full burden of the terrible choices adults make when they're desperate. "All right," I finally heard my mother say. her voice choked with held-back tears. "But I don't want to know the details, and I don't want to be here when it happens." I ran back to bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might jump out of my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay staring at the wooden ceiling of our small room, trying to make sense of what was about to happen, and praying that I had misunderstood. But I hadn't misunderstood. 3 days later, my mother announced she would spend the weekend at a friend's house. That was the first time she left me alone with my grandfather, and she couldn't even look me in the eye when she said goodbye. "Be a good girl, Elizabeth," was all she said before leaving with a small bag and leaving her self-respect behind. That night, my grandfather came into my room and threw a dress on my bed. A light blue dress. Simple, but the most beautiful one I'd ever seen. "Put this on," he ordered, "and wash your hair clean. Doctor, Lawrence will be here for dinner tonight." That's when I realized there was no escape. The fate they had decided for me was set. My body, its skill developing, had been sold without any choice. I washed my hair thoroughly, put on the dress that was a bit loose in the chest, and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting, my heart thumping with fear. When the doorbell rang, I felt sick. Dr. Lawrence arrived at 7 p.m. 2 Dave, bringing a bottle of wine for my grandfather and a box of chocolates for me. During dinner, which my grandfather had ordered from the corner restaurant, something we never did because we couldn't afford it, the man watched me with an interest that made me want to disappear. "She's perfect, Mr. Walter," he said as he examined me across the table. "Is she healthy? Has she ever had any serious illnesses? She's as strong as a horse." My grandfather replied as if he was selling an animal. "She's strong, smart. She'll have good children, Doctor. You can count on that." I kept my eyes down, tears threatening to spill at any moment. The man reached out and touched my face, lifting my chin to look into my eyes. "You don't need to be afraid. Girl, I'll take good care of you. And when our child is born, you'll get enough money to help your mother for a long time." I couldn't respond. His hand on my face felt like it was burning my skin, and the mix of his expensive cologne and cigarette smoke made me nauseous. After dinner, my grandfather suddenly said he needed to go to the store for cigarettes. He never smoked in his life. That was the signal they had arranged. As soon as the door closed, Dr. Lawrence came close to me on the sofa. "Your grandfather explained everything to me," he said, his heavy hand on my knee. "You'll carry my child since my wife can't? It's an honor. You know we'll pay handsomely for this." I tried to pull away, but he held my arm tight. "It won't hurt much," he continued, his voice deeper and more threatening. "And you'd better cooperate because your grandfather already took half the money. If you don't do your part, he'll be in serious trouble." Right then, as I looked into the eyes of the man who was going to use my body like merchandise, something inside me began to die. The dreamy girl who believed in fairy tales, the child who hoped things would get better, the daughter who trusted her mother to protect her from harm. What happened that night was the first horror in many horrors I endured in the years that followed. When my grandfather returned a few hours later, I was huddled in the corner, with the blue dress torn and stained, crying quietly. He just looked at me, turned on the light, and said words that haunted me for decades. Get used to it. Girl, from now on, that's your role in the family. And so my nightmare began. A nightmare that lasted for years and led to me having 10 children I could never raise. 10 pieces of my heart torn out and given to strangers. 10 vivid memories of the horrors I went through. That first night with Dr. Lawrence was just the beginning of the dark path. A nearly 13-year-old girl was forced to walk. The next morning, I woke up with a sore body and a broken spirit. But there was no time to grieve. My grandfather came into the room early, threw a clean dress on the bed, and ordered me to get up. "Drink this tea," he said, handing me a steaming cup. "It's good for women. It'll help ensure the seed takes root." Those crude and inhumane words made me understand that, in his eyes, I was no longer his granddaughter. I was just a fertile field to cultivate for profit. The tea tasted bitter, made from herbs I later learned rural midwives used to strengthen the womb. I drank it in silence, the dried tears on my face leaving salty streaks. 2 days later, my mother returned. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but she couldn't look me in the face. She walked right past me, locked herself in the small room, and didn't come out for hours. When we finally met in the kitchen, I tried to express my pain and betrayal. She just raised her hand, cutting me off. "Don't say anything. Elizabeth, what's done is done." That was the first time I felt real anger toward her. A deep anger mixed with love and dependency. How could a mother allow this? How could she pretend nothing happened? But later that afternoon, I saw something that confused my emotions even more. My mother paid the overdue bills at the grocery store and bought real food for our empty pantry. The price of my innocence was feeding the family, and that was just the beginning. In the weeks that followed, I lived in a state of constant alert. Every sound at the gate made me tremble. Every look from my grandfather seemed to signal a new visit. A new horror. School became my only refuge. There, for a few hours. I could pretend I was just a normal girl with dreams and hopes like the others. My teacher, Rebecca, noticed the change in me. "Elizabeth, you're so different. Is something wrong at home?" she asked. One afternoon, she hugged me after class. I opened my mouth to tell her everything, to beg for help, but my grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "If you tell anyone, they'll send you to an orphanage. And there, girl, it's even worse. I'm just tired, Miss," I replied, looking down. "I've been helping a lot with the housework." A month after that first encounter, Dr. Lawrence came back, and after him, others followed. At first, not many. My grandfather was careful not to raise suspicions with the neighbors. One here, one there. All older men with wives who couldn't have children, all willing to pay well to use my young body to carry their heirs. When I missed my period 2 months after that first night, my grandfather celebrated as if he'd won the lottery. "It worked on the first try," he exclaimed to my mother. who just nodded silently. I remember placing my hand on my still, flat belly, trying to feel a connection to the life beginning there. A life created in violence, but innocent all the same. Dr. Lawrence was informed and showed up the next day with his wife, a thin and elegant woman named Claire. She looked at me with a mix of gratitude and contempt I'll never forget. "You're giving us the greatest gift," she said, trying to smile while her husband talked with my grandfather on the porch. "But remember, that's not your child. It's ours. You're just the gardener tending to our seed." During my first pregnancy at 13, my body changed quickly. I had to leave school when my belly started showing. "We'll say you're visiting relatives in the country," my grandfather explained. "When you come back without the belly, no one will ask too many questions." I was confined to the house for months. Dr. Lawrence paid for vitamins, good food, and even maternity clothes. I was treated like a prize hen that needed feeding to lay the best egg. Every 2 weeks, he and his wife would come to check on the baby's progress. He would examine me, measure my belly, and listen to the heartbeat. Those moments were humiliating beyond words. During that time, my mother started to change. With the money coming in, she cut back on her cleaning jobs. She bought new clothes and started going out with friends more, as if she was trying to escape the reality of what was happening in our home, as if she wanted to believe the money came from somewhere else. "You're bringing a better life to our family," she said in those rare moments when we were alone. "One day you'll understand that we did what was necessary." But I didn't understand then, and I never will. My first child, a boy, was born at home with a midwife paid for by Dr. Lawrence. It was painful and terrifying, an experience number 13-year-old girl should go through. When I finally heard the loud cry of the baby I'd carried for 9 months, something awakened inside me, a deep instinct, a profound love that took my breath away. I wanted to see my son, I asked, reaching out to the midwife, wrapping him in a blue blanket. "He's not your son," she answered coldly, handing the baby to Claire, who was waiting anxiously at the door. "You've done your part. Now rest." I heard my son's cries fade as they took him away. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I stared at the ceiling, helpless. That was the first time a piece of my heart was ripped out. It wouldn't be the last. A few days later, I received the name of my child, Peter Lawrence. The doctor told me, maybe as a twisted form of thanks, and brought me a thick envelope of money. "Your share for a job well done," he said. The money went straight into my grandfather's hands. Of course, I only had 2 weeks to recover before my grandfather brought news of another interested couple, a coffee farmer in Northern California and his young wife who couldn't carry to term. "But I just had a baby," I protested. My body still sore, my breast still leaking milk with no baby to nurse. "I need time. Time is money." "Girl," he replied without pause. "And this farmer is paying double what Dr. Lawrence did." That's how I got pregnant for the second time at 14. And then the third, with hardly any break, my young and strong body recovering quickly. As my grandfather liked to point out to his clients, I was an efficient producer in his warped view. From 13 to 18, I had 5 children, 5 babies snatched from my arms before I could even remember their names and faces. To the outside world, I was Mr. Walter's troubled granddaughter, always visiting relatives in the country, always sick, always reclusive. In reality, I was a prisoner, a breeding slave controlled by my own family. During that time, my mother transformed into someone I hardly recognized. With the money from my services, she bought her own house across town. She'd visit occasionally, always dressed nicely, always in a hurry. She had gotten what she wanted. Financial freedom, at the cost of her daughter's freedom. "Why did you allow this?" I asked her once, my belly swollen with my 4th child. "Why didn't you help me escape?" She looked away, unable to face my direct accusation. "Where would you escape to?" "Elizabeth, with what money?" What for? She never even finished elementary school. "And now you have this reputation." "What reputation?" "The one you've created for me as a girl who disappears and seems to be pregnant. People talk about your grandfather and his granddaughter. He has connections. Important people are involved in this. They don't want to be exposed." That's when I realized I wasn't just a victim of my grandfather. I was a victim of a whole system that let powerful men buy a girl's body and ignored the obvious truth. A system that blamed the victim instead of the predator. I knew that even if I escaped, where would I go who would believe my story? By 19, I had given birth to 6 children. My body showed the marks of so many pregnancies. Silver stretch marks covered my belly and chest. My womb was weakening. As one of the midwives warned me, "This girl needs rest. Mr. Ney, Walter, or she won't be able to have children anymore." That warning scared my grandfather enough to give me nearly a year of rest. The longest break I ever got during my childhood. During that time, I tried to gather my strength and think of alternatives, but I was constantly watched, with no money of my own, and no proper education. It was then that I met Clara, a woman who sold herbs and sometimes helped with births. She came to care for me after deliveries, preparing Poultice for recovery, gradually. I gained her trust. "What they're doing to you is wrong." "Girl," she whispered one day while applying ointment to my stretch marks, "it's against God's law and man's law." For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. Someone saw the truth. Someone recognized my horror. "Clara, please help me escape," he begged, grasping her wrinkled hands. "Please." She shook her head sadly. "I can't. Child, your grandfather has the sheriff in his pocket. I've seen others try to escape and end up worse off. But I can teach you how to protect yourself a little. Clara was the one who taught me about herbs that could temporarily reduce my fertility, giving me short breaks between forced pregnancies. It wasn't freedom, but it was something. A minimal control over my own body. By 20, I was the mother of 7 children I'd never had the chance to raise. 7 pieces of my heart scattered among wealthy families in California and neighboring states. My body was exhausted. My spirit was broken. But something inside me refused to give up completely. I started jotting down small details about each client, each baby, names, dates, and features. I hid these notes under a loose floorboard in my room. At the time, I didn't know what I'd do with the information, but something told me it would be important someday. After the third pregnancy, when I was nearly 23, my body showed signs of wearing out. Giving birth to my 10th child was particularly difficult. I lost a lot of blood, got an infection, and nearly died. The doctor called in a hurry and paid well to keep quiet, warned us. This young woman can't have any more children. Her womb is severely damaged. To my grandfather, it was as if his golden goose had flown away. Ironically, that medical complication represented a twisted form of freedom. If I couldn't have more children, what use was I to them now? What would they do with me? The answer came faster and more cruelly than I imagined. And that's when I resolved to end the cycle of horror once and for all. You might wonder how someone could survive so many horrors and still keep their sanity. The truth is, a part of me died with each baby taken from my arms. I built a fortress inside, a place in my soul where I kept the fragments of the girl I used to be and the children I never got to hold. The years between my first and 10th child passed like an endless nightmare. After the third, I realized I had to find a way to endure it all without going completely mad. I started detaching from the world around me, living as if I was observing everything from a distance. People who understand this kind of trauma call it dissociation. I called it survival. My 4th child was born when I was 16. A girl with light hair like mine. Only in that moment, as the midwife held her up, did I get to see her perfect little face before they took her away. I cried for weeks. That's when I began writing notes on scraps of paper hidden under my mattress, noting names, dates, and details of each child. I didn't have photos, so I sketched them as best I could. Their little faces, tiny hands, the shape of their eyes. That's how I kept them alive in me. My daily routine from 16 to 23 was predictable in its horror. Periods of active service, as my grandfather called them. When men came to help me conceive, then the pregnancy months. When I was fed well and monitored closely to ensure the baby was healthy. The births were always painful, always followed by heartbreaking separation. Then a short recovery period. And it all started again. My 5th child was born when I was 17. A boy. The 6th right after I turned 18. The 7th when I was 19. The 8th and 9th with short intervals when I was 22. And finally, on my 23rd birthday. The 10th birth nearly killed me and permanently damaged my womb. During those pregnancies, I had moments of such deep despair that I thought about ending it all. What stopped me was those scraps of paper, the records of my children. If I left, who would keep their memories alive? Who would know the truth about their origins? Meanwhile, my mother grew wealthy from the money I endured for. She bought a better house and opened a small business, a clothing store in town. She went to New York to buy goods, made new friends, and frequented the best beauty parlor in town. Our relationship became an unbridgeable chasm. On her rare visits, she brought expensive, useless gifts. Pretty dresses I could only wear between pregnancies. Perfumes. Jewelry. As if material things could make up for selling her daughter. If you like my life story, please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Such a simple action helps me a lot. One day you'll understand that your mother did the best she could with what we had. She often said, repeating it like a mantra that probably helped her sleep at night. I never responded. How could I say I understood that would be too big a lie? Even by our family's twisted standards. In contrast, my grandfather showed his prosperity more discreetly. He remodeled the house, bought a new radio, and drank imported beer. More importantly, he gained status. He was seen as a successful businessman, invited to town events and treated with respect. No one questioned the sudden source of his income. No one asked about his reclusive granddaughter, always away. Always allé. The men who paid to use my body were all different. But they had one thing in common. They were all wealthy, all in positions of power. Doctors, farmers, politicians, businessmen. They all had wives who couldn't have children for some reason and saw themselves as benefactors, as if they were helping me by repeatedly violating me. You should be grateful. One of them, an important local politician, said to me as he buttoned his pants after one of his assaults disguised as an attempt to conceive. Many girls would give anything for what you have. Good food, nice clothes, a roof over your head, and all you have to do is lie back and accept the seed. I swallowed my response along with my dignity. I soon realized that resisting only made things worse, that screaming brought more pain, that crying annoyed them. So I became silent, absent even when present, a body without a soul for them to use as they wished. Of course, there were exceptions. Not all were cruel. Some seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the arrangement, but too desperate for children to question the morality of what they were doing. One of them, a university professor from Modesto, even asked if I was doing this willingly. Before I could answer, my grandfather interjected, "Of course she is. To doctor. She knows the importance of her work. Bringing life to families who can't have children naturally." That lie was so absurd I almost laughed. But laughter, like many other emotions, had died in me long ago. The wives of these men treated me in various ways. Some showed reluctant gratitude. Others hid jealousy. Most were a mix of contempt and fascination. I was both the solution to their problem and a living reminder of their failure. The only thing they all shared was their determination to claim the children my body produced as if they were commodities ordered from a store. Don't attached. The wife of the 7th client warned me when she saw me stroking my belly and humming a lullaby. "It'll be easier if you remember your place in this arrangement." My place. As if I'd chosen it. As if I had any choice at all. The 8th birth was especially traumatic. The baby was breech, and the traditional midwife couldn't handle it. After hours of pain, they had to call in a doctor, not the father, but another one paid well to ask no questions. He performed painful manœuvres, and finally, The baby was born. A girl, tiny and frail. So weak I thought she might not survive. "Don't even think about dying," I whispered to her as they placed her in my arms before taking her away. "Be as strong as your mother." In that moment, something shifted in me. A decision began to form. If I couldn't save my children, if I couldn't bring them back, maybe I could at least ensure that one day they would know the truth. That they weren't the children of the women who raised them, but of a young woman who never had a choice. I became more methodical with my secret notes. Not just names and dates, but addresses I occasionally overheard in conversations. Details about the parents, birthplaces, or unique features of each baby. Anything that could help identify them someday. From the 9th to the 10th birth, I had my longest break. Nearly 10 months. My body was clearly showing signs of exhaustion. I was only 22. But I looked much older, weakened by repeated pregnancies, difficult births, emotional separations, and ongoing abuse. There were days I could hardly get out of bed. During that time, I discovered my mother had bought a beach house in Santa Barbara, a vacation home built on the money earned from my suffering. The news came from Clara, my only connection to the outside world. "Your mother's there with a new car?" she told me while applying herbal poultices to my aching back. Talking about her new beach house, inviting people to visit. "It seems like her business is going well." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. While I lived in endless nightmare, my mother enjoyed the fruits of my torment without remorse. The betrayal hurt as much as the physical abuse. When I became pregnant with my 10th child at 23, something in me knew it would be the last. My body had reached its limit. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Constant nausea, bleeding, unrelenting pain. The doctor who occasionally checked on me, paid handsomely by the father, a coffee businessman, showed concern, but no one dared suggest terminating it. The final product, the baby, was too valuable to lose. Labor started early in the 8th month. Intense pain, heavy bleeding, high fever. I vaguely remember being taken to a private clinic on the outskirts of town, where no one asked questions. I remember the doctor's frightened face, the nurses rushing around, my grandfather pale with worry. Of course, not for me, but for the money he wouldn't get if I died. The baby was born, a small but healthy boy, and taken away immediately. Envy, on the other hand, struggled between life and death for days. Severe infection, heavy bleeding, irreparable wound damage. When I finally fully regained consciousness, the doctor was clear. "You can't have any more children. We had to remove part of your womb to save your life." For most women, that news would be a tragedy. For me, it was like a door opening after a decade of imprisonment. Not being able to have children meant I was no longer useful for my grandfather's main purpose. That meant I might finally glimpse some form of freedom. But reality was far from my brief hope. When I returned home after 2 weeks in the hospital, I found my grandfather sitting in the living room, holding a glass of whiskey with a calculating look. "You've cost me a lot with all this trouble." he said, without even asking how I was. "And now you're no good for the main purpose anymore." I stayed silent, waiting. I knew anything I said could make what was coming even worse. "But you're still young and beautiful," he continued, eyeing me as if appraising livestock. "You could still serve in other ways. I have friends who would pay top dollar for a young woman with your experience. Even if you can't have children." The horror of that proposition hit me like lightning. After all I'd been through, after my body being used as an incubator for a decade, now I was to be turned into a pure sex object. The idea was unbearable. Even worse than what I'd endured. In that moment, facing my grandfather and seeing him not as the man who should protect me, but as the monster who destroyed my life, I made my final decision. It was time to end the cycle of horror, no matter the cost. It was time for me to seek freedom or die trying. With a calm that surprised even me, I just nodded slightly and went to my room. I said nothing, showed no resistance. I wanted him to think he'd completely broken me, that I was just an empty shell ready to accept whatever fate he assigned. That night, alone in my room, I swore to my 10 stolen children that this man would pay for every tear I shed, for every scream I suppressed, for every part of my body sold without my consent. I swore I'd find a way to escape and make sure he never did to another girl what he did to me. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. And I, after 10 years in hell, was ready to serve it. I planned my revenge with the patience of someone who's waited too long, with the cold calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. While my body recovered from the surgery that saved my life, but took away my ability to bear children, my mind worked non-stop, plotting every detail of what I would do next. My grandfather gave me 2 weeks to rest before starting to bring in other men. Different ones from before. They weren't looking for children. They were just looking for pleasure without commitment. His old friends, local politicians, businessmen on trips, all willing to pay well for a few hours with a young woman he claimed knew how to please men. I pretended to submit. I kept my eyes down, nodded when he ordered. Didn't protest. I wanted him to believe he'd fully broken me, that I was just a doll without a will of my own. But inside, a fire was burning during the days when I was alone at home. As my grandfather kept his usual routine of leaving in the mornings for business, I began searching every nook and cranny of the house. I needed 3 essential things: money, documents, and evidence. Money was the easiest to find. My grandfather, though suspicious by nature, had grown overconfident over the years. He kept a fair amount at home, hidden in a false bottom of an old wardrobe. Not a lot, but enough to get me started somewhere else. The documents were trickier. He kept everything in a locked desk drawer. After observing his habits for days, I discovered the key was on the keyring he always carried, except when he bathed. During one such bath, I made a soap impression, then used it to fashion a makeshift key. When I finally opened that drawer, I found my whole life summarized in yellowed papers: birth certificate, old school records, even vaccination cards from my childhood. But most importantly, I found his business records, notebooks where he meticulously logged every transaction, every payment received for selling my body and the children I bore. Names, dates, values, full evidence of his crimes. I held those notebooks with trembling hands, hardly believing he was foolish enough to keep such incriminating records. But I understood they were his trophies, proof of his cleverness. He never thought I'd dare touch his things or have the courage to confront him. I photographed every page with a simple camera I'd bought from a neighbor, claiming I wanted to capture images of the yard flowers for a personal project. Then I returned the notebooks exactly as they were. He couldn't suspect anything until it was too late. The third element in my plan was the hardest. I needed an ally. Someone who could help me escape when the time came. Someone I could trust in a world where my trust had been stolen along with everything else. That's when I thought of Clara, the healer who had helped me for years, who cared for me after births, who looked at me with genuine compassion while everyone else saw me as merchandise. If anyone could help, it was her. One afternoon, when my grandfather was out handling business in the city, I sent a neighbor boy to call her, saying I felt unwell. When she arrived, worried and breathless, I closed the door behind her and finally poured it all out. Not just what everyone knew about the forced pregnancies, but my escape plan, my need for justice. "Girl," she said, after listening in silence, "what you're planning is very dangerous. Your grandfather has powerful friends. If things go wrong, I could die, but I've been dead inside for years." I replied with a calm that frightened her. "What do I have left to lose?" She studied me for a long moment, her old eyes weighing not just my words, but the determination beneath them. Finally, she nodded. My things had been stolen, along with everything else. And that's when I thought of Clara, the healer who had helped me for so many years and taken care of me afterward. Every time I gave birth, she looked at me with such genuine compassion, while everyone else just saw me as a piece of property. And if anyone could help me, it was her. Her. One afternoon, when my grandfather went out to handle business in the capital, I sent a neighbor boy to call her and say that I wasn't feeling well. When she arrived, worried and out of breath, I closed the door behind her and finally let it all out. Not just what people already knew about my unwanted pregnancy, but also my plans to escape and my need for justice. "My dear girl," she said after listening quietly, "what you're planning is very dangerous. Your grandfather has powerful friends. If things go wrong, you could die." I finished with a calm that scared her. "But I've been dying inside for years," I told her. Clara said, "I have nothing left to lose." She studied me for a long time, her old eyes weighing not just my words, but the determination behind them. Then, at last, she nodded and said, "I'll help you, my child. But we have to be very careful. Clara was the one who contacted a journalist from the Modesto newspaper. She didn't tell the whole story, just enough to spark interest. About a young woman held captive and forced to have children for sale in a scheme involving powerful people. That kind of story could make a reporter's career. And meanwhile, I kept up the act of submission. I continued to meet the customers my grandfather introduced, pretending I had accepted my fate. And he was so confident in his control over me that he started to let his guard down. He stopped locking my bedroom door at night. And sometimes he went out for hours, leaving me alone for long stretches. I used those moments to gather what I needed, like basic clothes in a small bag hidden under the bed, and the money I had saved little by little. I rolled that money up in old socks, and I got back important documents from his desk. Most importantly, all the evidence of my grandfather's crimes that I had carefully recorded. My plan was simple but risky. And on one night, when my grandfather had to go out for an important meeting at the trade association, Clara was going to pick me up. And we would head straight to Modesto, where the journalist would meet us. I would hand over all the evidence, give a full statement, and then disappear to start a new life far away with a new identity that Clara had arranged. Everything was ready, every detail planned, and I waited for the appointed day with growing anxiety. It was the 15th of June, 1979, a day I'll never forget. But as they say, even the best laid plans can go wrong, and mine almost fell apart the night before my escape. My grandfather came home earlier than expected that evening, and he looked noticeably different because of the alcohol, which was unusual since he rarely drank too much. He prided himself on staying sharp for business. So something serious must have happened. And he ordered me to pack as he threw a suitcase on my bed. "We're leaving town early tomorrow," he said. And I felt my blood run cold as I asked where we were going. "To Tennessee, to a friend's isolated farm, where we'll stay until things settle down here." But I tried to control my shaking voice as I asked what things. He looked at me suspiciously, as if gauging whether I knew anything, and said it was his business and to just do as he told me. When he left the room, I allowed myself a moment of silent panic because everything was falling apart. And somehow he had found out something. If I left with him the next morning, I knew I'd never get another chance. So I had to act alone that night without Clara or the support I had planned. It was now or never, and I waited until I heard his loud snoring from his room. At least the drink had made him sleep deeply. My heart was pounding so hard I thought he might hear it as I gathered my prepared things and quietly moved toward the door. Just then, I heard a soft knock on the back window, and I froze in fear for a moment. The knocks repeated in a pattern I recognized, and it was the signal we had arranged with Clara. I carefully opened the window to avoid making noise. And there she was, her worried face lined with tension as she whispered that we had to go right away. My grandfather had found out something and was planning to take me away tomorrow. And I asked in surprise how she knew. Her son works at the bar where my grandfather had been, and he overheard everything, including a warning from a friend in the police. It seemed the journalist had asked too many questions and drawn attention. So there was no time for full explanations as I handed her my small bag through the window. I squeezed through the narrow opening, and at 23 years old, after 10 pregnancies, my body wasn't as slim as a young girl's anymore. But desperation gave me the strength I didn't know I had. We walked quickly through the night, staying away from the main streets, and Clara explained that her nephew was waiting for us in an old car at the edge of town. The plan had changed, and we wouldn't go to Modesto because it was too risky. So we were heading to San Diego, where she had a cousin who could put us up. "What about the journalist and the evidence?" I asked, worried that all my preparations might be for nothing. But she replied that she had already sent everything to him yesterday. Copies of everything I had collected, and he would publish the story in 2 days once we were far away. I felt both relieved and disappointed, because part of me wanted to be there when my grandfather faced his crimes and see his face when he realized I had ruined him. But the wiser part of me knew Clara was right, that my presence would only complicate things. And I had suffered enough without risking my hard-won freedom. Her nephew drove us to a nearby bus station, where we caught a bus to San Diego. And during the nearly 15-hour trip, I hardly said a word. I just stared out the window, watching the scenery change as the California mountains gave way to the landscapes of Southern California. I felt a mix of emotions. Of course, fear of being caught or taken back, but also a fragile hope starting to sprout like a plant in long barren soil. And surprisingly, there was guilt. Guilt for leaving my 10 children behind. Those pieces of my heart scattered among the families that had bought the right to be their parents. Clara once said, as if reading my thoughts, that they were better off there with families that had money and education. Now, what could I offer them as a 23-year-old girl with no formal education, nor skills, and no money, running from a terrible past? It was painful to admit. But on that bus, I silently promised myself that one day, when I was safe and had built something for myself, I would try to find them, not to disrupt their lives or dig up painful truths, but just to know they were okay and that something good had come from so much suffering. We arrived in San Diego the next morning, and the city was a shock to me. Someone who had never left the rural areas of California. The noise, the crowds, the tall buildings, is avondexprode, like something from a movie. Clara's cousin, Zoe, lived in a small apartment in East San Diego, and she welcomed us with cautious hospitality, not exactly enthusiastic about harboring fugitives. But her respect for Clara said it all, and 3 days after our escape, I saw the headline in the newspaper that Zoe brought home from work. The scandal involving the baby-selling ring in Fresno with important figures, and I read the article with trembling hands, as the journalist had done a great job connecting the dots. He interviewed people who had suspected the scheme for years but were afraid to speak up. And he presented the evidence I had gathered. My name wasn't mentioned. I was just described as a young woman held captive for over 10 years. But my story was there, exposing all its brutality. My grandfather was arrested along with 2 involved doctors and a sheriff who had covered it up. Other clients were under investigation. And the article mentioned that I had escaped and no one knew where I was. It also brought up my mother, who denied any involvement and claimed I had mental issues and gotten pregnant with a boyfriend. But no one believed her. Of course, the evidence was clear, and I felt a mix of complex emotions reading it. Relief that justice had finally come, but also deep sadness. not for my grandfather's downfall. That monster deserved every second in prison, but for the life stolen from me and the innocence lost that no headline could restore. That night, I asked Clara as we sat on the small balcony of the apartment, looking at the city lights that were now our refuge. "Now you're alive, girl," she answered, her wise old eyes shining with the kind of wisdom that only age can bring. For the first time, truly living. And that's what I tried to do with the money I had. I rented a simple room in East San Diego. I found a job at a local bakery where I learned to make bread and pastries. And slowly, very slowly, I began to build something like a life. But the shadow of the past was still long. I had nightmares all the time, jumped at sudden noises, and avoided men at all costs. I kept to myself in my little world, afraid to trust, afraid to open up, and afraid to really live. Then, 6 months after my escape, an unexpected event changed my life again. A chance encounter that taught me even after hell, we can find peace. Even after the darkness, light can still shine through. And San Diego in the 1980s was a city of contrasts that both scared and fascinated me. For someone who grew up in disguised captivity, every street corner was a new challenge, and every social interaction a test for my wounded spirit. The bakery where I worked was on a busy street in East San Diego, and I woke up at 4 a.m. to prepare bread for hundreds of rushing San Diegans. I liked the hands-on work, the simplicity of turning flour and water into food, and the warmth of the oven seemed to warm my cold heart too. On a rainy March morning in 1980, en de Fendendanage in den fast, I met Thomas. He came into the bakery soaked, shaking his broken umbrella and joking about his bad luck as he said, "It was a perfect day for hot coffee and toast." "You don't think so?" he asked with a natural smile that left me flustered because I wasn't used to men talking to me like I was just a normal person. Thomas was a 30-year-old bus driver with his own story of overcoming hardships. The son of immigrants from Honduras who lost his parents young and was raised by his aunt in tough conditions. He had earned everything in his life through hard work and a kindness that seemed to defy all the hardships the world threw at him. He started coming to the bakery every morning, always polite and respectful as he talked about simple things like the weather, the news, or a movie on television. He never asked personal questions or invaded my space, as if he instinctively knew I carried deep wounds not to be touched. Of course, I avoided him like I did all men. But there was something about Thomas. Maybe the way he spoke gently to everyone, from the bakery owner to the street sweeper, that slowly started to break down the walls I had built around my heart. Our first date happened simply and unexpectedly when he offered me a ride on a clear day in San Diego. And I agreed because otherwise I'd wait hours for a bus that might not even come. In his old but spotless car, we really talked for the first time as he told me about his dream of having a small farm outside the city where he could raise chickens and grow a garden. He spoke about the future with a hope that was completely foreign to me. And then he asked, "What about you, Elizabeth? What are your dreams?" I was silent for so long that he must have thought I wouldn't answer. But the truth was, I had never allowed myself to dream because survival took all my energy. Peace, I finally answered. I just want a little peace. He nodded, as if that simple answer held all the wisdom in the world, and didn't ask any more questions. Just turned on the radio to fill the silence between us. Our relationship grew slowly, like a fragile plant. First with occasional outings, then walks around the neighborhood on Sundays, and sometimes movies, always respecting my limits and never pushing me to do more than I could handle. It took 6 months before I could share parts of my story with him. Not everything, because I didn't have the courage, but enough for him to understand why I flinched at loud voices, why I pulled back when someone got too close, and why I cried seeing children playing in the park. Thomas listened without interrupting or judging, and when I finished, he just held my hand. Our first real physical contact beyond a quick goodbye hug. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Elizabeth," he said, and I felt broken and damaged. But something in the way he looked at me, seeing past the scars, made me think that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild myself. Our first kiss happened nearly a year after we met on a park bench in front of the Chula Vista church, and it was hesitant, gentle, and it made me cry, not from pain or fear, but because I realized that despite everything, I still had room inside me for tenderness. "We can go as slow as you need," he told me that night. "I have all the time in the world," and that's exactly what we did. Dating for 3 years before marrying in a simple ceremony at the same church where we shared our first kiss. By then, Thomas knew my whole story, every dark detail and every horror I had endured. He knew the scars on my body and soul, but somehow, he loved me anyway. Our married life was a continuous learning experience, with nights I woke up screaming from nightmares where my grandfather came back for me. Times when intimacy felt impossible because the lightest touch triggered horrific memories. But Thomas never complained or demanded anything. He just held me quietly, waiting for the storm inside me to pass. Gradually, with the help of a psychologist that Clara recommended, I started to process the trauma and understand that what happened to me didn't define me or determine my future. In 1984, 2 years after we married, Thomas made his dream come true. And with all our savings, we bought a small farm in San Bernardino County, outside San Diego. It wasn't anything fancy, just a modest house, some land, and a few fruit trees already planted. But it was ours, a safe place away from the shadows of the past. That year, we faced our first big challenge as a couple when, after months of trying to conceive, the doctors confirmed our suspicions. Complications from my 10th pregnancy had left permanent damage, and I could never have biological children. For many women, that news would be devastating. And for me, it was complicated. Sad on one hand, because we couldn't give Thomas a child of his own, but on the other, a relief not to go through pregnancy again. Something that in my mind was tied to trauma and loss. We could adopt. Thomas said that night after we got the medical confirmation, "There are so many children who need a home and love. We can build a family in other ways." And the idea of adoption touched something deep inside me. My 10 biological children were out there living lives I knew nothing about. And perhaps this was a way to heal that wound. Not by replacing them, because that was impossible, but by giving the motherly love I never got to express to other children who, like me, had suffered abandonment and pain. The adoption process in the 1980s was bureaucratic and slow, especially for a simple couple like us. But Thomas was persistent, and I learned that patience can be a form of resistance as we visited orphanages, filled out forms, and went through interviews and evaluations. At one shelter in Escondido, we found Sophie, a 4-year-old girl with eyes that were too serious for her age. She had been abandoned by her teenage mother and gone through 2 adoptive families who returned her because she was too difficult. She didn't talk much, had frequent nightmares, and sometimes had unexplained outbursts of anger. And I immediately saw a reflection of my own pain in her. When we approached her small bed in the dormitory, she curled up like a wounded animal, expecting another rejection. Instead, I sat on the floor at a distance and softly sang a lullaby that my mother used to sing to me before everything fell apart. By the 3rd day of our visits, she let me brush her hair. And by the 5th, she held Thomas's hand as we walked in the shelter's garden. By the 10th day, she shyly asked if she could call us Mum and Dad. And it took nearly a year to finalize the legal process. In 1986, we finally brought Sophie home, and our family officially began. The first months were tough as Sophie constantly tested our boundaries, expecting us to give up on her like everyone else. Crying for hours and refusing to sleep alone. She destroyed toys in fits of rage. But I understood that pain, that fear of abandonment, and that anger at a world that seemed determined to hurt the most vulnerable. And gradually, with steady love and safe boundaries, Sophie started to thrive. And her first real laugh when she saw a newborn goat on our little farm was like music to me. 2 years later, our family grew again with 2 more siblings, Daniel, who was 6, and Lily, who was 2. They had lost their parents in a car accident and had no other relatives to take them in. So our once quiet home was now filled with children's voices, running feet, and daily discoveries. We planted gardens together, cared for animals, watched television, and cuddled on rainy nights as Thomas built a swing in the tree and taught Daniel how to fish in the stream on our land. I baked on Sundays and told stories before bed, made up tales about sad children finding families that loved them forever. In 1990, our family was complete with the arrival of Noah, a 3-month-old baby abandoned at a church door. Unlike the others, he didn't carry painful memories, just the universal need to be loved. And Sophie, now 10, proudly took on the role of big sister, caring for him as if it was her life's mission. And looking at my 4 children, I saw them as children of my heart. Sometimes I wondered about my 10 biological children, whether they were healthy, happy, or if they knew anything about their origins. The answer to that last question came unexpectedly in 1992, when Noah was 2. And I received a letter with a return address, but no sender's name. Inside was a newspaper clipping and a handwritten note from a California paper, published that year, about a new book revealing details of the Fresno surrogacy scandal. The author was identified as the son of one of the couples who discovered his origins after finding hidden documents in his parents' house. The note simply said, "Thank you for giving us life even in the worst circumstances. Some of us now know the truth. We're okay. And I hope you are too." I cried for hours after reading that. For the girl I once was, for the mother I could never be, and for those 10 children whose lives had taken such different paths from mine. But for the first time, those weren't just tears of pain. There was relief, gratitude, and a sense that something important had been acknowledged and honored. I never knew which of my biological children reached out or how, and I respected their wish for anonymity, their choice to just let me know they were okay. That was more than I ever expected. And the years that followed were relatively peaceful as our children grew up, faced their own challenges, and built their identities. Sophie became a teacher, her serious demeanor finding purpose in educating other children. And Daniel followed in Thomas's footsteps as a professional driver. Lily discovered her musical talent that we nurtured with pride. And Noah, our youngest, grew up happy and confident without the shadows that marked his older siblings. Thomas and I grew old together, half and endevistevi, and he was diagnosed with diabetes in 1995, which brought some limitations. But we faced it like we faced everything, one day at a time. And in 2010, we learned that my grandfather had died in prison at 92, never showing remorse for his crimes. My mother had passed away years earlier in 1998, alone in her seaside home without ever trying to contact me. I felt nothing but a vague sense of closure, knowing that those who shared my blood, but not my values, no longer had any power over me. My real family was around me. In the husband who taught me to trust again, in the children we chose and who chose us, in the grandchildren starting to be born, bringing new life and hope. And today, at 68, I look back and see a life that, despite its tragic beginning, is filled with more love than pain. Thomas, my companion for 43 years, is still by my side. A little slower with age, but with the same gentle smile that won me over in that Chula Vista coffee shop. Our home is the gathering place for Sunday lunches, where 3 generations come together. Sophie, Daniel, Lily, and Noah bring their children, my precious grandchildren, and we fill the table with food, stories, and laughter. In my happiest moments, I look around and think, this is healing, this is redemption. I never went back to Fresno. I never wanted to see the places of my suffering again. But I also never hid my story from my children as they grew up. I told them age-appropriate versions, always emphasizing that the horrors I endured didn't define who I became. I always told them that life can break you. But whether you stay broken or gather the pieces and build something new is up to you. That's what I did. I patiently and determinedly collected each piece and built a life that, though scarred visibly and invisibly, is mine. A life I chose, not one imposed on me. And if you're watching this video and going through a tough time, know that there's hope on the other side of the pain. Even in the darkest situations, light can still emerge. You're stronger than you imagine and more resilient than you believe. To all you dear ones who followed my story this far, I hope you'll like this video and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me to know that my story has touched hearts and might help those going through similar struggles. Life isn't always fair. My friends, sometimes it hits us with such force that we feel we can't get up. But believe this old lady who's seen it all. Dawn always comes after the darkest night. And when it does, it brings the chance for a new beginning. With loving hugs from this grandma who learned her lessons the hard way, that our greatest strength often shows up exactly when we think we have none left. Until next time,